This yellow liquid, known as plasma, can be used to make treatments for patients with medical conditions like bleeding disorders. The donation process takes about an hour and a half. A company called Canadian Plasma Resources offers $25 per donation. The company recently opened a clinic in Saskatoon and is expanding within Canada. Advocates against the practice want the company to be banned in Alberta. They're traveling the province this week, urging the government to enact legislation similar to that already in Ontario.
And joining us tonight from Calgary is Kat Lantang, co-founder of BloodWatch.org. That's an organization representing tainted blood survivors and patients who use plasma-based medications. And on Skype tonight from Quebec City, David Page, Executive Director of the Canadian Hemophilia Society. Welcome both of you to Alberta Primetime.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
David, let's start with you. Representing just one organization in the country whose members use plasma-derived medicines, does it matter to you whether the blood comes from paid or unpaid donors?
It doesn't matter. And I think the first thing people need to understand is that this is not a safety issue. All the science out there, whether it's from the researchers, the physicians, the regulators, show that products from paid donors are equally safe to those from unpaid donors. The real issue is what is the best business model to ensure adequate supply for the world and for Canada. And all the evidence from around the world shows that we cannot do this with a purely uncompensated system.
Kat, your organization is partnering with Friends of Medicare on the Cross Alberta tour that we mentioned in the primer leading up to this discussion. Why are you against paid plasma clinics?
Well, I think first it's really important to understand that BloodWatch.org is also a patient voice, and we represent hemophiliacs in Canada as well. It should be known that the British Columbia and the Ontario Hemophilia Society both said no to private paid plasma collection in Canada. And I think the misconception is that a private blood broker in our country actually helps us with more supply, and that is false, because the source plasma from Canadian Plasma Resources is to be exported out of Canada. We have been assured by Canadian Blood Services that they will not purchase what Canadian Plasma Resources is buying from people who are selling their plasma to them. That is extremely important to understand. The second piece of that is the healthiest blood and plasma scientifically is well documented to come from voluntary donors. And there is evidence from the European Blood Alliance, which is essentially all of the Canadian blood services in the EU, that demonstrates when private blood brokers come into countries, they impact a voluntary blood system. In Germany specifically, when a private blood broker shut down and the German Red Cross went in to set up, they could only get 1 out of 6 donors back into the system. So that's really important to understand. This is about securing Canadian supply for Canadian patients.
Okay,
and
let's
it
talk
is the sole
about
responsibility
the Canadian
of
supply here. I'm going to mention, of course, we have to bring in the Canadian Blood Services. While CBS is completely self-sufficient in its red blood cell collection, voluntary plasma donation rates in the country are very low. So about 3/4 of Canada's plasma needs actually come from paid donors in the United States. CBS brings that donated product into our country.
What's very important to realize is if we did not access this commercial paid plasma market, many patients in this country who get immune globulin products would not have access to the life-saving therapies that they have today.
And according to the CBS website, the organization points out that patient and patient groups have been confident in using these products without the concerns that once existed because of the extensive safety steps inherent in their manufacturing. So, Kat, now back to you. You can see why I needed to jump in there to bring this up. Why shouldn't we then accept any way that could increase the number of donations after hearing this?
So the donations for plasma are actually not down in Canada. That is a completely false statement. Canadian Blood Services has been closing down their sole plasma clinics. They closed one down in Thunder Bay in Ontario. And as I said, private blood brokers don't actually increase our supply, they diminish it. So that's not true. Canadian Blood Services, and I met with the 2 vice presidents last week in Ottawa, are tripling their plasma collection strategy. People are very happy to donate. Quebec, which runs its own blood system in its province, has a very successful standalone plasma program, and they are turning donors away because they're overwhelmed with people who want to donate. Our point is this: a private blood broker in Canada actually does not help anyone with supply. The people of Alberta also have to understand that this blood broker was very aggressive and hostile in Ontario. They threatened to sue the Ontario government. Our former health minister, Deb Matthews, had to have their clinics raided because they were collecting without a license, and they have since sent libel and defamation threat letters to our patient group, to the Council of Canadians, to journalists, and very alarmingly, to Canadian Blood Services. That is not who we want collecting plasma on behalf of Canadians. Because
we have to bring David back into this conversation, and I do want to mention the information that we did mention here comes directly from Canadian Blood Services. David, you have the floor. Your reaction.
Well, I have to disagree with almost all of the facts presented by BloodWatch. They're unfortunately uninformed. But I will agree with one thing that BloodWatch says. Perhaps CPR, which is the company coming into Saskatoon and perhaps in other places, may not have the best business model. They don't have a fractionator. They don't have licenses to export. So there are certainly some problems there. That doesn't mean, however, that there aren't other companies around the world who have a long track record of excellent production who could come in and be a partner in Canada. The truth is, there's not a country in the world that has been able to convince non-compensated donors to donate plasma at the level we need. There is no way that CBS, that I can see, will go from 200,000 liters to 500,000 liters unless the provinces and territories throw a huge amount of money at this problem. And there's no evidence that they're ready to do that. And there's no evidence that even if they do, they'll be successful in attracting those donors.
Okay, Kat, I saw you shaking your head. Go ahead.
Well, like I would like to point out again, a private blood collector in our country actually doesn't help us with increasing our supply. It is a fundamental principle in the Crever inquiry, not only for Canadian Blood Services to be the sole collector of blood and plasma on our behalf, but that in our country we have one national operator. And that's because we have oversight over our supply in Canada. When you have private companies coming in and taking over the point of collection, they are treating it as a commodity to make money and not as a health product to provide for patients. And those are two very different things. No recognition has been put to how CETA and the TTP would impact private blood brokers taking over a huge portion of our plasma collection in Canada. And this blood broker has demonstrated that when you have a private for-profit corporation treating the source of life-saving medications that we need for patients like a commodity, it creates a very hostile environment, and we perceive that to be dangerous. We've gone through the tainted blood crisis. 8,000 Canadians died because of it. The key counsel and head lawyer from the Crever inquiry is on our board, and two of my co-founders are tainted blood survivors and hemophiliacs. One of them is a veteran tainted blood advocate. This is something that we understand, and I have a lot of respect for Mr. Page. He's done amazing work with the Canadian Hemophilia Society, but I do object to the idea that we are not informed and that we don't understand science, because I can promise you that is something that we consult on a lot.
Let's now hear from the company at the center of this debate, Canadian Plasma Resources. It emphasizes it is fully licensed and inspected by the federal government. It says it is expanding to Atlantic Canada later this year and also has the support of the governments in all Western provinces except Alberta. Now, when asked if it plans to move here, a company spokesperson told us, quote, "Because we are investing millions of dollars and hiring hundreds of employees, we would require a clear commitment from the government of Alberta that it would not change its laws to prevent us from compensating plasma donors." Now, we asked Health Minister Sarah Hoffman about this. She says, quote, "Our government is committed to supporting Alberta's voluntary blood donation system, in which public safety is paramount. We will make sure it is protected today and that it is protected for Albertans in the future." Now, David, the government would not specify when we asked further whether a ban is imminent, so pretty vague. What do you make of the minister's comment?
Well, it wouldn't be helpful to ban compensated. We have two systems today. We have one system for fresh components run by CBS, completely voluntary, unpaid. That's not going to change. We have a second system, which is for plasma-derived products. 80% of the plasma for those plasma-derived products comes from U.S. paid donors. So if BloodWatch were consistent and provincial governments were consistent, they would prohibit compensation and they would prohibit all products from compensated donors in the U.S. Thousands of lives would be in peril. That doesn't make any sense whatsoever. What does make sense is trying to find a business model that will make Canada more self-sufficient, whether that's from CBS donors, and we hope they will continue to grow, to attract more, but it's going to have to be also from compensated donors. There's no other model that's worked in the world.
Kat, of course, we do know your opposing viewpoint, but looking for your thoughts about what we've heard from the province.
Well, I met with Minister Hoffman in April, and we had a very great discussion. We have a lot of hope for Alberta that they'll move forward. This passing of the legislation in Ontario, it also has been illegal in Quebec, this practice, since 1994. And like I said, they have a very successful domestic plasma program. It is our understanding that the minister is very supportive and has read the legislation from Ontario. Ontario recognized that this would actually not help with our Canadian supply, and that is very important, and I think the health minister here understands that. We are delivering a petition to Minister Hoffman that has over 15,000 signatures on it. We partnered with Some of Us, and we're delivering that to the legislature on Friday afternoon. There are, I think, almost 1,300 signatures from Albertans on that particular petition. It was a national petition. It all should be recognized that the British Columbia cabinet in the Liberal government is totally fractured on this issue. And the BC health minister has absolutely no support from patient groups there, or from public health organizations, or from the public. So this issue is ongoing. All of that plasma in Ontario that company collected illegally had to be destroyed. And the only way to saving the life of a fellow Canadian when we collect blood and plasma in this country is to donate to Canadian Blood Services.
Okay, I have to give last word here, as we have just 20 seconds to David to round things off. David, hearing that and rounding it up.
I think we need to recognize that the current blood supply system in Canada is excellent. And patients receive plasma-derived products absolutely free of charge. And that includes plasma products from compensated donors. So, we have a system here that's working really, really well, including compensated donors. We should have more of them from Canada. But we have to recognize this is not a risk to our public health system or to our public blood system.
We've definitely heard your viewpoints very clearly, the two of you. Thank you very much for this discussion.
Thank you so much for having us. We really appreciate it.
Okay, that is Kat Lantang. She is co-founder of BloodWatch.org, and David Page, Executive Director of the Canadian Hemophilia Society.